The word tomato comes from the Spanish tomate, which in turn comes from the Nahuatl word tomatal meaning swelling fruit. Also, fat water, or fat thing. The native Mexican tomatillo is tomate. When Aztecs started to cultivate the fruit to be larger, sweeter and red, they called the new variety xitomatl, plump with navel, or fat water with navel. Tomatoes are a significant source of umami flavor. They are consumed in diverse ways, raw or cooked, and in many dishes, sauces, salads, and drinks. While tomatoes are fruits, botanically classified as berries, they are commonly used culinarily as a vegetable ingredient or side dish. Numerous varieties of the tomato plant are widely grown in temperate climates across the world, with greenhouses allowing for the production of tomatoes throughout all seasons of the year. They are vines that have a weak stem that sprawls and typically needs support. Indeterminate tomato plants are perennials in their native habitat, but are cultivated as annuals. Determinate, or bush, plants are annuals that stop growing at a certain height and produce a crop all at once. The tomato is the edible berry of the plant Solanum lycopersicum, commonly known as the tomato plant. The species originated in western South America, Mexico, and Central America. The Mexican Nahuatl word tomatal gave rise to the Spanish word tomate, from which the English word tomato derived. Its domestication and use as a cultivated food may have originated with the indigenous peoples of Mexico. The Aztecs used tomatoes in their cooking at the time of the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, and after the Spanish encountered the tomato for the first time after their contact with the Aztecs, they brought the plant to Europe, in a widespread transfer of plants known as the Columbian Exchange. From there, the tomato was introduced to other parts of the European colonized world during the 16th century. The wild ancestor of the tomato, Solanum pimpinellifolium, is native to western South America. These wild versions were the size of peas. The first evidence of domestication points to the Aztecs and other peoples in Mesoamerica, who used the fruit fresh and in their cooking. The Spanish first introduced tomatoes to Europe, where they became used in Spanish food. In France, Italy and Northern Europe, the tomato was initially grown as an ornamental plant. It was regarded with suspicion as a food because botanists recognized it as a nightshade, a relative of the poisonous belladonna. This was exacerbated by the interaction of the tomato's acidic juice with pewter plates. The leaves and fruit contain tomatine, which in large quantities would be toxic. However, the ripe fruit contains a much lower amount of tomatine than the immature fruit. The exact date of domestication is unknown. By 500 BC, it was already being cultivated in southern Mexico and probably other areas. The Pueblo people are thought to have believed that those who witnessed the ingestion of tomato seeds were blessed with powers of divination. The large, lumpy variety of tomato, a mutation from a smoother, smaller fruit, originated in Mesoamerica, and may be the direct ancestor of some modern cultivated tomatoes. The Aztecs raised several varieties of tomato, with red tomatoes called exoctomatl and green tomatoes called tomatl, tomatillo. Bernardino de Sahagun reported seeing a great variety of tomatoes in the Aztec market at Tenochtitlan, Mexico City: large tomatoes, small tomatoes, leaf tomatoes, sweet tomatoes, large serpent tomatoes, nipple-shaped tomatoes, and tomatoes of all colors from the brightest red to the deepest yellow. Bernardino de Sahagun mentioned Aztecs cooking various sauces, some with and without tomatoes of different sizes, serving them in city markets. Food sauces, hot sauces, fried food, a la cooked food, juices, sauces of juices, shredded food, with chili, with squash seeds, most likely cucurbita pepo, with tomatoes, with smoked chili, with hot chili, with yellow chili, with mild red chili sauce, yellow chili sauce, hot chili sauce, with bird excrement sauce, sauce of smoked chili, heated sauces, bean sauce. He sells toasted beans, cooked beans, mushroom sauce, sauce of small squash, sauce of large tomatoes, sauce of ordinary tomatoes, sauce of various kinds of sour herbs, avocado sauce. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés may have been the first to transfer a small yellow tomato to Europe after he captured the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, in 1521. The earliest discussion of the tomato in European literature appeared in a herbal written in 1544 by Pietro Andrea Mattioli, an Italian physician and botanist, who suggested that a new type of eggplant had been brought to Italy that was blood red or golden color when mature and could be divided into segments and eaten like an eggplant, that is, cooked and seasoned with salt, black pepper, and oil. It was not until 10 years later that tomatoes were named in print by Mattioli as Pomi d'Oro, or golden apples. After the Spanish colonization of the Americas, the Spanish distributed the tomato throughout their colonies in the Caribbean. They also took it to the Philippines, from where it spread to Southeast Asia and then the entire Asian continent. The Spanish also brought the tomato to Europe. It grew easily in Mediterranean climates, and cultivation began in the 1540s. It was probably eaten shortly after it was introduced, and was certainly being used as food by the early 17th century in Spain. The tomato was introduced to China, likely via the Philippines or Macau, in the 1500s. It was given the name Fanchie, barbarian eggplant, as the Chinese named many foodstuffs introduced from abroad, but referring specifically to early introductions. The recorded history of tomatoes in Italy dates back to at least the 31st of October 1548, when the house steward of Cosimo de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, wrote to the Medici private secretary informing him that the basket of tomatoes sent from the Grand Duke's Florentine estate at Torre del Gallo had arrived safely. Tomatoes were grown mainly as ornamentals early on after their arrival in Italy. For example, the Florentine aristocrat Giovinvettorio Soderini wrote how they were to be sought only for their beauty, and were grown only in gardens or flower beds. The tomato's ability to mutate and create new and different varieties helped contribute to its success and spread throughout Italy. However, even in areas where the climate supported growing tomatoes, their habit of growing to the ground suggested low status. They were not adopted as a staple of the peasant population because they were not as filling as other fruits already available. Additionally, both toxic and inedible varieties discouraged many people from attempting to consume or prepare any other varieties. In certain areas of Italy, such as Florence, the fruit was used solely as a tabletop decoration, until it was incorporated into the local cuisine in the late 17th or early 18th century. The earliest discovered cookbook with tomato recipes was published in Naples in 1692, though the author had apparently obtained these recipes from Spanish sources. Unique varieties were developed over the next several hundred years for uses such as dried tomatoes, sauce tomatoes, pizza tomatoes, and tomatoes for long-term storage. These varieties are usually known for their place of origin as much as by a variety name. For example, Pomodorino del Pianello del Vesuvio is the hanging tomato of Vesuvius, or the well-known and highly prized San Marzano plum tomato grown in that region. Tomatoes were not grown in England until the 1590s. One of the earliest cultivators was John Gerard, a barber surgeon. Gerard's Herbal, published in 1597, and largely plagiarized from continental sources, is also one of the earliest discussions of the tomato in England. Gerard knew the tomato was eaten in Spain and Italy. Nonetheless, he believed it was poisonous. Gerard's views were influential, and the tomato was considered unfit for eating for many years in Britain and its North American colonies. However, by the mid-18th century, tomatoes were widely eaten in Britain, and before the end of that century, the Encyclopaedia Britannica stated the tomato was in daily use, in soups, broths, and as a garnish. They were not part of the average person's diet, and though by 1820 they were described as to be seen in great abundance in all our vegetable markets, and to be used by all our best cooks, reference was made to their cultivation in gardens still, for the singularity of their appearance, while their use in cooking was associated with exotic Italian or Jewish cuisine. The tomato arrived in India by the way of Portuguese explorers, in the 16th century. It was grown from the 18th century onwards for the British. Even today, in Bengal, the alternative name is bilati begun, meaning for an eggplant. It was then adopted widely as it is well suited to India's climate, with Uttarakhand as one of the main producers. The tomato was introduced to cultivation in the Middle East by John Barker, British consul in Aleppo circa 1799 to 1825. 19th century descriptions of its consumption are uniformly as an ingredient in a cooked dish. In 1881, it is described as only eaten in the region, within the last 40 years. Today, the tomato is a critical and ubiquitous part of Middle Eastern cuisine, served fresh in salads e.g. Arab salad, Israeli salad, Shirazi salad and Turkish salad, grilled with kebabs and other dishes, made into sauces, and so on. The earliest reference to tomatoes being grown in British North America is from 1710, when herbalist William Salmon reported seeing them in what is today South Carolina. They may have been introduced from the Caribbean. By the mid-18th century, They were cultivated on some Carolina plantations, and probably in other parts of the Southeast as well. Possibly, some people continued to think tomatoes were poisonous at this time, and in general, they were grown more as ornamental plants than as food. Thomas Jefferson, who ate tomatoes in Paris, sent some seeds back to America. Some early American advocates of the culinary use of the tomato included Michelle Felice Korn and Robert Gibbon Johnson. Early tomato breeders included Henry Tilden in Iowa and a Dr. Hand in Baltimore. Alexander W. Livingston receives much credit for developing numerous varieties of tomato for both home and commercial gardeners. The U.S. Department of Agriculture's 1937 yearbook declared that half of the major varieties were a result of the abilities of the Livingstons to evaluate and perpetuate superior material in the tomato. Livingston's first breed of tomato, the Paragon, was introduced in 1870, the beginning of a great tomato culture enterprise in the county. In 1875, he introduced the Acme, which was said to be involved in the parentage of most of the tomatoes introduced by him and his competitors for the next 25 years. When Livingston began his attempts to develop the tomato as a commercial crop, his aim had been to grow tomatoes smooth in contour, uniform in size, and sweet in flavor. He eventually developed over 17 different varieties of the tomato plant. Today, the crop is grown in every state in the Union. Because of the long growing season needed for this heat-loving crop, several states in the U.S. Sun Belt became major tomato producers, particularly Florida and California. In California, tomatoes are grown under irrigation for both the fresh fruit market and for canning and processing. The University of California, Davis, UC Davis, became a major center for research on the tomato. The C.M. Rick Tomato Genetics Resource Center at UC Davis is a gene bank of wild relatives, monogenic mutants and miscellaneous genetic stocks of tomato. The center is named for the late Drive. Charles M. Rick, a pioneer in tomato genetics research. Research on processing tomatoes is also conducted by the California Tomato Research Institute in Escalon, California. In California, growers have used a method of cultivation called dry farming, especially with early girl tomatoes. This technique encourages the plant to send roots deep to find existing moisture in soil that retains moisture, such as clay soil. The poor taste and lack of sugar in modern garden and commercial tomato varieties resulted from breeding tomatoes to ripen uniformly red. This change occurred after discovery of a mutant U phenotype in the mid-20th century that ripened uniformly. This was widely crossbred to produce red fruit without the typical green ring around the stem on uncrossbred varieties. Prior to general introduction of this trait, most tomatoes produced more sugar during ripening, and were sweeter and more flavorful. The town of Buñol, Spain, annually celebrates La Tomatina, a festival centered on an enormous tomato fight. On the 30th of August 2007, 40,000 Spaniards gathered to throw 115,000 kilograms of tomatoes at each other in the festival. Several U.S. states have adopted the tomato as a state fruit or vegetable. Tomatoes have been designated the state vegetable of New Jersey. Arkansas took both sides by declaring the South Arkansas vine-ripe pink tomato both the state fruit and the state vegetable in the same law, citing both its culinary and botanical classifications. In 2009, the state of Ohio passed a law making the tomato the state's official fruit. Tomato juice has been the official beverage of Ohio since 1965. Alexander W. Livingston, of Reynoldsburg, Ohio, played a large part in popularizing the tomato in the late 19th century. His efforts are commemorated in Reynoldsburg with an annual tomato festival. Flavor Saver was the first commercially grown genetically engineered food licensed for human consumption. Tomatoes are a popular, non-lethal throwing weapon in mass protests, and there was a common tradition of throwing rotten tomatoes at bad performers on a stage during the 19th century. Today this is usually referenced as a metaphor. Embracing it for this protest connotation, the Dutch Socialist Party adopted the tomato as their logo. The U.S. city of Reynoldsburg, Ohio calls itself the birthplace of the tomato, claiming the first commercial variety of tomato was bred there in the 19th century. Rotten Tomatoes is an American review aggregation website for film and television. The name, Rotten Tomatoes, derives from the practice of audiences throwing rotten tomatoes when disapproving of a poor stage performance. Rotten Tomatoes took the tomato metaphor further by rating films as certified fresh if they got a score of 75% or higher. fresh for films with a score of 60% or higher that do not meet the requirements for the certified fresh seal, and rotten for films with a score of 0-59%.